Play different.
Greetings fellow Mac addicts. In this video we're looking at Bonkheads Deluxe, and by extension, the non-deluxe version of Bonkheads. As some of you may have already picked up on, Bonkheads is a clone of Mario Brothers. No, not Super Mario Brothers, but rather the original single-screen two-player arcade game which still makes appearances as a minigame in modern Nintendo games. The basic mechanics are identical to the ones found in the game that inspired it. Enemies spawn at the top of the level and wander towards the bottom. It's your job to flip the baddies over by headbutting the ground beneath them and then knock them off the screen by walking into them. If they manage to get to the bottom of the screen, or if you take too long to knock them off, they'll start to move faster. There are of course various types of enemies with different behaviours you have to deal with, and there is also a limited use box of TNT which will flip over all enemies on solid ground. So, what does Bonkheads do to spruce up a game which was over 10 years old at the time? Well, the graphics are much more modern for one, with a mix between 90s CG and hand-drawn sprites. I actually quite like the aesthetic. Some may think it's ugly, especially some of the character designs, but I find it quite charming. What I don't find charming is that the entire game has only a single, incredibly repetitive music track. The sounds may be goofy and fun, but that music made me want to bonk my head against a wall. Anyway, what the game really brings to the table is variety. There are far more enemies, power-ups, block types, and way more levels than in the original Mario Brothers. In fact, there are 144 of them, plus a set of 40 bonus levels for those who somehow mastered the original set. These bonus levels are a part of what makes this the deluxe version, in addition to a level editor, online multiplayer, and a bit of spit and polish here and there. So with all these additions, the game must be much better than the original Mario Brothers, right? Well, Bonkheads certainly has many fans, but I'm not one of them. Now, if you love this game, that's fine. I just don't enjoy it much myself, and here's why. My main criticism is the controls. The Bonkhead brothers are extremely floaty in the air, which makes jumping from platform to platform quite finicky. This is made worse in the underwater levels, which lowers the gravity even more. Compounding this is that the brothers are also quite bouncy, ricocheting off platforms if you happen to miss and hit them on the sides. Finally, the brothers are also a bit too slippery on the ground, making them feel unresponsive. It all adds up to a game that doesn't feel satisfying to control. I also have a problem with the level design. Sure, it has much more variety than the original Mario Brothers, but whereas the small selection there were built perfectly around the mechanics, it doesn't feel like that's the case in Bonkheads. There are too many small passages to squeeze into, too many places where you can't reach enemies to flip them over, or where you can't get to the enemies once you have flipped them over. It leads to a lot of waiting around for baddies to get into the right positions. Which brings me to my next complaint, which is the enemies. I'm actually quite a fan of the variety of baddies the game has, including the bosses despite one being a Chinese stereotype, though it is a parody of an infamous Chinese stereotype. But the problem is that they start moving so slowly. It makes the previously mentioned problem of waiting for enemies to get into the right spots even worse, and the game ends up feeling like a slog. Okay, I think I've complained enough. Basically, while I do appreciate that the game tried to add variety to the Mario Brothers formula, I felt that the execution was poor and it ended up as a slow, sometimes frustrating experience. Sure, the original Mario Brothers doesn't have much content, but I'd rather play that for 10 minutes than Bonkheads for 5 minutes, simply because it's more fun to play. Again, this is just my opinion, as clearly many others love this game from the comments I've read. I was hoping to tell those fans about a HD remaster for iOS which came out in 2012, but unfortunately, it appears to no longer be available. And that is Bonkheads, a remake of an arcade classic that, in my opinion, didn't quite bonk the nail on the head.